Hello everyone. Like in my last video, I started writing the script hoping to respond to an argument, and not really bringing up the Twitter war aspect of this whole kerfuffle.
Kerfuffle.
There's been, kerfluffle.
But oh boy, it's really gotten dark. Now, I'm still not really gonna address the Twitter war aspect, except to say that I really hate where we are right now. So I'm gonna do my part to improve the discourse by just focusing on the arguments, and treating everyone involved like the valuable human beings that they are. So, if not about the kerfuffle, what is this video about? Well, this is a response to these two videos, one by Sara Michel, and the other by Rationality Rules. By the end of this video, I hope to do these two things. 1. Point out the common ground that I have with Rationality Rules, Sara Michel, as well as their primary critic, Essence of Thought. And 2, I'm going to respond to an argument made by Sara Michel and Rationality Rules in their respective videos. Rationality Rules begins his video with the following quote by Robert J. Hanlon: "Never attribute to malice that which can adequately be explained by stupidity." This quote I 100% agree with. However, Rationality Rules ends his video with a modification of that quote. "Never attribute to bigotry that which is adequately explained by ignorance." I think these two quotes together can be interpreted as an argument. In other words, I think he's saying because we should never attribute malice to someone when we can explain their views or behavior with stupidity, therefore we should never attribute bigotry to someone if we can explain their views or behavior with ignorance. Sara seemed to be making this argument in her video as well. She critiqued the atheist community of Austin for their statement that accused Rationality Rules of making videos that were transphobic, because she thinks they assumed that Woodford's intentions were malicious. The problem that I have with both of these arguments is that they're assuming that all bigotry has to be malicious, and that's what I hope to rebut in this video. Now, I want to make it clear that I'm not calling Sara Michel or Woodford transphobic, and I'm not even calling Woodford's video transphobic. Someone can be wrong about what constitutes bigotry without being a bigot themselves. I just think they're wrong about what constitutes bigotry. So, I thought I'd start off with something we all have in common. We all decided to get haircuts at some point during the kerfuffle. Rationality Rules got a haircut. Essence of Thought got a haircut. I got a haircut. I guess Sara didn't get a haircut. God damn it.
Jake.
Hair! We all have hair.
As already stated, I 100% agree with the quote that Rationality Rules begins his video with. One thing that he tried to get across in many of his videos was that his intentions weren't malicious, and I agree with that as well. This third thing isn't really something I agree with, but just something that I like about him, and that is, I think Rationality Rules is trying to be open-minded. And I think open-mindedness is a virtue, no matter what conclusion a person comes to. One thing that makes me believe he's open-minded is that he starts his video off with the following.
Now, if you think I'm wrong on this topic and have a better argument than those just covered, then please do let me know, as if I'm wrong, I want to know it.
I hope to provide good arguments for why they should change their mind in this video, but I try and be open-minded myself, so if you have any critiques, I'd love to hear them in the comment section below. And of course, I really appreciated the apology portion of his apology videos, as well as the fact that he gave some of the proceeds to a transgender charity. One thing that I really respect about Sara is that she's willing to have conversations with people who disagree with her rights as a trans woman. While I don't think that all trans people are obligated to do that, I do think it's a good thing to do if you can, and it's something that I try and do myself. One of my favorite philosophers, John Corvino, echoes many of the sentiments that Sara expresses that I generally agree with. However, instead of talking about trans rights, he was talking about the debate around same-sex marriage.
And people will often say to me, how can you call Maggie Gallagher your friend? I mean, how can you, as a gay rights advocate, spend time hanging around with and being in a friendship with someone actively fighting against equal marriage rights? The answer to that question is complex, and I want to talk a little bit about the answer to that question, because there is a sort of strategic aspect to it, but there's also a personal aspect to it. In terms of the strategic aspect, I want to win this. I want to win this for my sake as a gay man in a relationship, but even more importantly, I want to win it for the sake of all those people who come after me, and particularly the young people out there who are gay or lesbian who ought to be able to aspire to happily ever after in marriage.
Because the only way, if we want to be tolerated, if we want to be understood and accepted, we need to have conversations with people. And we need to have them, we need to allow people to express their concerns, to express their doubts, and then just talk like normal people.
I also have a lot of agreements with their primary critic, Essence of Thought. Ethel drives home the point that not all bigotry has to be malicious, and that's an area of common ground that I definitely share. Dr. John Corvino gives a really good example of someone who has a bigoted view, but also has really good intentions.
It wasn't until sometime in the 90s that a majority of Americans supported interracial marriage, some 20 or 30 years after Loving versus Virginia, the 1967 decision that struck down laws against interracial marriage. During that intervening period of several decades, would we say that none of the people for whom interracial marriage was a bridge too far were decent, honorable people who just, had a different view about marriage?
Of course, that's a rhetorical question. He does believe that there are decent, honorable people who are against interracial marriage. And he even gives a specific example from his own life in one of his books. In a book that he co-authored with his friend and same-sex marriage opponent, Maggie Gallagher, he writes, "Let me illustrate from my own experience. My grandparents, like many other whites of their generation, opposed interracial marriage. I loved, admired, and respected my grandparents. Their racism was not the sneering, epithet-wielding, block-the-schoolhouse-door variety. Their stated reasons against interracial marriage seemed noble enough. It was bad for the children, they'd say, or it's not what God wants, or sometimes it's just not right." I hope we can agree that being against interracial marriage, while well-intentioned, was still bigoted on some level. When I say bigotry on some level, I'm saying that I agree with the YouTuber, Mr. Atheist, in one of his videos.
We have to understand that transphobia also exists as a spectrum. The spectrum certainly exists with homophobia, which is something I get to see and experience firsthand. It's so fun and great. And this spectrum ranges from the people down at the low end that say things like, why can't we just call it a civil union instead? It gets somewhere around the middle, maybe mid-high, with the people who's, no, you don't get the right to marry. This is a religious institution you must be excluded from. And then, there's the full-blown ones that we in the pumpkin crew, pumpkin posse, pumpkin gang have been fighting against. The people who literally say, I want you to die because this is who you are.
Another great piece of philosophy that I think discusses this issue eloquently is the musical Avenue Q. In the song, Everyone's a Little Bit Racist.
Everyone's a little bit racist. Doesn't mean to go around committing hate crimes.
This song gives some good examples of everyday bigotry. Some of these examples, I suspect people on the right will think are bigotry, but people on the left won't think are bigotry. And some of the other examples, I think people on the left would think are bigoted, but people on the right might not. Now remember, if even one of these examples is actually bigoted, and can also be held by someone with good intentions, then the idea that all bigotry has to be malicious must be false.
Do you know Trekkie Monster upstairs?
Uh-huh.
Well, he's Trekkie Monster, and you're Kate Monster.
Right.
You're both monsters.
Yeah.
Are you two related?
What? Princeton! I'm surprised!
So they start off with two examples. One of somebody asking if two people of color know each other, and the other of having a school just for people of color. I suspect that a lot of people on the left might think that the former is racist, but the latter isn't. And a lot of people on the right might think that the latter is racist, but the former isn't. If you think either of those are racist, then you have to conclude that not all racism has to be malicious.
You're a little bit racist.
Well, you're a little bit too.
We're both a little bit racist.
Maybe it's not an easy thing to do.
But I guess it's true.
Later on, they give the example of laughing at a person of color's accent, and using the term Oriental.
How many Oriental wives have you got?
Brian.
Brian, buddy, where you been? The term is Asian American.
If you think either of those are racist, then you have to conclude that not all bigotry has to be malicious. Lastly, I'm gonna get a little personal here. I think this whole idea that people with good intentions can't be bigoted is especially unpersuasive to a lot of LGBT people, because a lot of the bigotry that we have in our lives is done by the people who care about us most. One of my parents threatened to disown me if I transitioned. Of course, they didn't end up doing that, but it did really affect me for a really long time. I think you can interpret that as coming from a good place, because they thought that transitioning would be bad for me, and they were trying to persuade me not to transition. One of my parents also said that no matter how much surgery or hormones that I take, I'll never actually look like a man. That's pretty mean, and it was super hurtful, but I think it was coming from a good place. If you think that a surgery isn't going to be effective, you don't want your kid to go through that permanent, life-altering surgery. Even something as extreme as conversion therapy can come from a really good place. If you think that your child is going to hell forever if they don't turn themselves straight, then that's a pretty strong incentive to try and force that kid to be straight. Hopefully we can agree that one of those examples is actually bigoted, and also coming from a good place. In part 2, I'm going to go over some less stigmatizing alternatives to the term bigotry to describe the less extreme forms of bigotry. I think there's a spectrum of bigotry, and I don't think that we should use the same term to describe all the levels of bigotry. If you want to make sure that you see part 2, subscribe to my channel, and if you liked this video, give it a like.